All right, ready to dive deep. You all wanted to explore William Wallace.
And, well, we've got a ton of awesome sources to get us through it. We've got some medieval chronicles like the Chronicon,
Oh,
and some more
classics.
modern takes like Andrew Fisher's William Wallace and
Yeah.
William Wallace. A National Tale by Graham Morton.
Yeah, this is going to be quite the journey. I mean, Wallace is a figure that's just kind of shrouded in this myth and legend. And our goal today, I think, is to try to peel back those layers a little bit and uncover the man behind that kind of Braveheart persona. I mean, we've all seen that movie.
Yeah. Less blue face paint, more real history.
Exactly. More digging into the real complexities of his life and his leadership and what made him, such a potent symbol even centuries later. Yeah, definitely. And, speaking of myth busting, we should probably start right off the bat with one. We've all heard about, Wallace's father, Sir Malcolm Wallace of Elderslie. Like it's pretty ingrained in the kind of, traditional narrative.
Mhm.
But get this. More recent evidence actually suggests that his true father was Alan Wallace.
Yeah. Fisher really gets into this in his book. And you might think, like at first glance, that it's like a pretty minor detail, right?
Mhm.
But when you actually kind of take a step back and think about it, this new information really changes our understanding of Wallace's kind of, upbringing and the social context that he emerged from. It really highlights how these historical narratives can evolve as new evidence comes to light.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like realizing that the foundation of a story that you thought you knew was actually completely different.
Exactly.
And then you start to question everything else.
Yeah. And this is where the importance of like primary sources and critical analysis really comes in, right? Like we can't just kind of accept these traditional narratives at face value. We have to dig deeper, consider different perspectives, and really kind of be, aware of how these stories have been shaped over time.
Right. So we've kind of, debunked the myth of his father.
Right.
What about his early life? I mean, is there anything that really kind of hinted at the military leader he would become?
So the sources unfortunately don't give us like a crystal clear picture of his childhood. It would be nice, but
Right.
one thing is for sure, there's no concrete evidence of any formal military training before he kind of explodes onto the scene as this rebel leader.
So where did that come from? I mean, where did his military genius come from? Was it just raw talent?
Well, that's a question that has kind of puzzled historians for centuries. Some speculate that he might have served as a soldier abroad, perhaps in France or Wales, places where he could have kind of honed his skills,
Yeah.
in the heat of battle. But again, it's all speculation. There's no hard evidence.
Right. I mean, that adds a whole other layer of intrigue to his story, though. Like,
Right.
it's almost like this missing chapter waiting to be discovered.
Yeah, definitely.
But speaking of missing chapters, what about that really famous story of Marion Braidfeud, Wallace's wife or
Yeah.
lover, being brutally murdered by the English? I
Right.
mean, that's often portrayed as a key catalyst for his rebellion.
Right. Yeah, it's that classic tale of love and vengeance. And it definitely adds a powerful emotional dimension to his story, but the truth is, this story isn't historically confirmed.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Gray Morton, in his book William Wallace, A National Tale, examines how this romantic element might have been embellished over time. It might have become part of that national tale
Right.
of Scotland, like a narrative that kind of helps solidify, national identity and all that.
So you're saying it's more folklore than fact.
Potentially. Yeah.
So does that mean that it was purely a political rebellion with no personal stakes for Wallace?
Not necessarily. While that Marion Braidfeud story might be more legend than reality, there is a real event that kind of pushed Wallace onto this path of no return, and that's the murder of Esselrig,
Oh, yeah.
the sheriff of Lanark.
Right.
Yeah.
This is where things get real. I mean, this wasn't just a symbolic act or anything. This was like a full-blown declaration of war.
Exactly. Fisher actually highlights how this event was like the spark that ignited the rebellion. Even the Chronicon describes the scene, Wallace surprising Hesselrig during this court session in Lanark. Super bold move. Some might say ruthless,
Right.
but definitely one that sent shockwaves through Scotland.
Yeah. I mean, it's like a scene from a movie almost.
Right, yeah.
You can practically feel that tension in that courtroom. So this is the moment where Wallace becomes like a full-on outlaw
Right.
in the eyes of the English crown. No turning back.
Yep. And what's fascinating, what's really kind of interesting, is that Edward I's reaction to Hesselrig's death seems surprisingly muted compared to, say, his later fury towards Robert the Bruce.
That is interesting. I mean, you'd think the murder of a royal official would have triggered a much more immediate and severe response.
Yeah, you would think. So it raises the question, Did Edward the First initially underestimate Wallace? Did he view him as just like this minor nuisance rather than like the serious threat he would become?
Or maybe he had other priorities at the time. I mean, he was dealing with conflicts in France and Wales.
Good point.
So maybe he just couldn't afford to focus all of his attention on Scotland right at that moment.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. The political landscape at the time was incredibly complex, and Edward the First was constantly kind of, juggling these multiple challenges to his authority. So, regardless of his initial reaction, though, I think Wallace's actions at that point had unleashed a force that he couldn't ignore.
Right. He was no longer just like an outlaw hiding in the woods or something.
Right.
He was now a symbol of resistance, like a rallying point for the Scottish people.
Exactly. And this is where I think Wallace's leadership qualities really come to the forefront. He wasn't just a skilled warrior. He had this incredible ability to mobilize people, to inspire them to fight for this common cause.
It takes a special kind of person to rally a nation against, a really powerful enemy like that.
It does. And Wallace managed to do just that.
Yeah.
He organized the resistance, he recruited men from all walks of life, and, he transformed them into this fighting force capable of challenging the might of England.
Right. And then that leads us up to, like, his most famous victory.
Right.
The Battle of Stirling Bridge. I mean, this wasn't just a win. This was like a display of tactical brilliance.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Fisher describes how Wallace, alongside Andrew Murray, they used the terrain to their advantage. Like, they essentially lured the English army into this trap. They funneled them onto this narrow bridge, which created a bottleneck, neutralized their numerical superiority, and...
Classic David versus Goliath story.
Absolutely.
A smaller, less equipped force outmaneuvering a larger, more powerful army.
It's classic. And it was a real turning point in the war.
Yeah.
I mean, this victory sent shockwaves through England, boosted the morale of the Scottish resistance. I mean, you can just imagine the celebrations.
Yeah, you can totally picture it. I mean,
Yeah.
but as with all wars, there were also setbacks,
Oh, yeah.
right? And for Wallace, one of the biggest challenges he faced, I think, was the kind of fickle nature of the Scottish nobility.
Oh, yeah. That's a really crucial point. Both Fisher and Morton highlight how the Scottish nobility played this really complex and often frustrating role in the war. Their loyalties were constantly shifting. Sometimes they would support Wallace. Sometimes they would undermine him. It was never really clear where they stood.
I mean, it's kind of understandable, though, right? I mean, they had their own lands, their own interests to protect.
Yeah.
They weren't always willing to just, like, put everything on the line for the sake of a, unified Scotland.
For sure. And it's important to remember that Scotland at the time wasn't this like monolithic entity. There were deep divisions within the nobility. Some families were, more inclined toward cooperation with the English crown than others.
Right.
It was a messy situation.
So it sounds like Wallace wasn't just fighting the English. He was also battling against these internal divisions within Scotland itself.
Exactly.
Which makes his achievements even more impressive when you think about it.
Absolutely.
I mean, he had to navigate this really treacherous political landscape while also, leading an army against a foreign invader.
Yeah. Talk about a challenge.
Talk about pressure. But he didn't stop there.
Right.
I mean, his influence continued to grow. He was even appointed Guardian of Scotland for a while.
Oh, that's right.
Which means he was more than just a military leader at that point.
That's exactly right. That suggests kind of a level of political acumen that I think is often overlooked when we talk about Wallace. I mean, the guardianship signified that he wasn't just this, warrior, but a leader entrusted with the governance of the nation. He was issuing decrees, maintaining order, even trying to revive Scotland's international trade relations.
So it wasn't all just about fighting. I mean,
No, not at all.
he actually had to think about, governing and
Absolutely. He had to be a strategist.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, that raises the question, doesn't it? Was he loyal to the idea of Scotland itself? Or was there some ambition there for the throne? Was he a king in the making?
Yeah, it's a good question. And, one that has fueled a lot of debate among historians. Based on the evidence we have, though, it seems that his primary loyalty really was to the deposed king, John Balliol. He saw himself as a protector of Scotland's independence, acting on behalf of the rightful king. But who knows, maybe if things had gone differently, that ambition for the throne might have emerged.
Right.
It's hard to say.
It's so fascinating to think about these what-ifs of history.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, what if Wallace had lived longer?
Yeah.
Or what if he had succeeded in securing Scotland's independence? I mean, how would history have unfolded differently?
Right. It's all speculation, but fun to think about.
Yeah.
One thing that is certain, though, is that his time as Guardian was cut short by kind of a devastating defeat at the Battle of Falkirk. And, well, this defeat reveals yet another layer of these complexities and, unfortunately, the betrayals that defined his life.
Yeah. It's a tough one.
Yeah. Falkirk was, a real turning point in the war, and not a good one for Wallace. I mean, Edward I, he came back, like, with a vengeance this time. Brought a much larger army with him, better equipped.
It's like he learned his lesson from Stirling Bridge, huh?
Exactly. No more underestimating William Wallace.
Yeah.
Right. This time he was prepared. I mean, he deployed longbowmen, which, they could rain down arrows from a distance, a tactic that the Scots really didn't have a good answer for. And, well, to make things even worse for Wallace, he didn't have the support that he needed from those key Scottish nobles.
Yeah, the sources really paint a grim picture of that battle. It sounds like Wallace was kind of, I don't know, abandoned by those who should have been fighting right there alongside him.
It's a good question. Was this a calculated betrayal? Or was it just like self-preservation on the part of those nobles? I mean, you have to remember, these guys were always kind of balancing their own interests against the greater cause of Scottish independence.
Yeah.
And maybe Falkirk was just one of those moments where, those interests they diverged.
So instead of like a united front against the English, you've got these Scottish forces that are just fractured, weakened by all these internal divisions.
Absolutely.
That must have been incredibly frustrating for Wallace.
Oh, I can't even imagine.
To see his plans fall apart.
Yeah.
Just because of a lack of unity.
Yeah, it definitely adds another layer of tragedy to his story. And, I mean, that lack of unity would have lasting repercussions.
Right.
After Falkirk, Wallace actually resigned as Guardian of Scotland. He realized, I think, that a divided nation just couldn't stand against England.
Yeah, it's a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah.
That even the most brilliant military leader can't overcome that kind of deep-seated internal division.
Nope, he couldn't overcome it.
But even in defeat, I mean, Wallace, he remained a symbol of that resistance, right?
He did.
Did you just give up?
No, he didn't give up the fight. He continued to lead those kind of guerrilla raids against the English, just thorn in Edward's side.
Yeah.
But operating outside those traditional structures of power, well, I mean, it made him vulnerable.
Right.
And in 1305, he was captured.
Oh, no.
And, the circumstances surrounding his capture they're still pretty murky. But it seems like betrayal played a role. Again.
Wow.
I know, right? It's like a recurring theme in his life.
Yeah, I guess.
But this time, the consequences, well, they were far more severe.
Of course.
They transported him to London.
Right.
Put him on trial for treason.
Right.
The trial was a sham, obviously.
Right.
Edward I, he had already decided his fate.
It wasn't really a trial then.
No, not really.
They decided to put on a show, huh?
Yeah. Instead of treating Wallace as a prisoner of war, they put him on trial as a common criminal.
Right.
That says a lot about how Edward viewed him, don't you think?
I think so. Yeah. It feels like a very deliberate attempt to just, I don't know, dehumanize him.
Yeah.
Right? To kind of portray him as a traitor.
Right.
Instead of this freedom fighter.
Exactly. Yeah. And the punishment that followed, well, that was, I think, really meant to send a chilling message to anyone else who dared to challenge English rule.
Yeah. Yeah, and that brings us to his execution.
Yeah.
I got to admit, some of the details in the sources were pretty tough to stomach.
Yeah, it wasn't.
It was a brutal spectacle designed to, I don't know, just crush his spirit, I guess, and deter any future rebellions.
It was meant to instill fear,
Right.
Obedience.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. It seems like Edward's actions may have actually had the opposite effect.
You mean by making a martyr out of him?
Exactly. By trying to erase Wallace's legacy, Edward I, he inadvertently solidified it. Wallace's name, it became synonymous with Scottish resistance.
Right.
His story, it was passed down through generations, and it inspired future generations to keep fighting for that freedom.
Like the old saying, the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church.
Exactly.
But I guess in this case, it's the seed of Scottish independence.
Right, and it really speaks to that enduring power of symbols and stories. I mean, no matter how brutally a regime tries to, I don't know, suppress them, they often have a way of resurfacing, inspiring people long after those in power are gone.
So, I mean, we've gone through the major events of his life, right?
Yeah.
The triumphs, the tragedies, the betrayals. What does it all mean? What can we learn from William Wallace's story? I mean, why does his name still have this power
Yeah.
today, centuries later?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is.
I think one of the key takeaways here is the importance of leadership in the face of adversity.
Right.
Wallace's story reminds us that true leadership, it's not about holding a title, you know?
Right.
It's not about a position of power. It's about inspiring others, even when the odds are stacked against you.
Yeah, he definitely showed extraordinary courage,
He did.
even in the face of defeat.
Yes, he was willing to sacrifice everything, his comfort, his position, his life, for a cause that he believed in. And that kind of selflessness,
Yeah.
that willingness to put the needs of others above his own, that's something that resonates, I think, across time, across cultures.
Yeah, it's the kind of leadership we could use a little more of today, don't you think?
I think so too.
We're drawn to those stories of individuals who, stand up for what they believe in, challenge the status quo,
Yeah.
fight for a better world.
Right.
And I think Wallace embodies all of those
He
things,
does.
doesn't he?
Yeah,
And it also highlights those complexities of loyalty and betrayal.
for sure.
Wallace experienced both of those in his life.
Yeah.
He was betrayed by those he trusted,
Right.
but he also inspired incredible loyalty in his followers.
Yeah, that duality, I think, is what makes his story all the more human.
Right.
It shows that even in the midst of these grand historical events, it's often those personal relationships, the bonds of loyalty and trust that really shape the course of events.
Yeah, it's a reminder that history is made by people
Yeah,
with all their flaws and contradictions,
absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
Speaking of complexities, we can't forget about those internal divisions within Scotland.
Oh, no, for sure.
They played such a significant role in his story.
Yeah. Yeah, those shifting loyalties of the Scottish nobles, their competing interests, their sometimes hesitant support for Wallace. It highlights this recurring theme in Scottish history, that struggle to unify a nation that was so often divided against itself.
It's almost like an echo of, the political and social divisions that we see in our world today.
It is.
Right. The struggle to
Mhm.
find that common ground, to overcome those differences, to actually work together towards some shared vision.
Yeah, it's a timeless theme, and Wallace's story provides this really powerful lens, I think, through which we can kind of view those struggles.
Right.
His story reminds us that achieving that lasting change, it requires more than just, military victories or charismatic leaders.
Oh.
It requires this unity of purpose, this shared commitment to a common goal.
So, I mean, are you saying that Wallace's legacy isn't just about Scottish independence? I mean, it's about this broader human struggle
Yeah.
for freedom and justice and unity.
I think so. Yeah, his story, it transcends the specifics of, the time and place, speaks to these universal themes
Right.
that resonate with people, across cultures and across generations.
Yeah, we're drawn to his story because it reflects our own aspirations,
Yeah.
our own struggles for
Yeah.
a better world.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's wild, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, this figure from medieval Scotland, he still feels so relevant today.
It really is. And it speaks to the power of stories, right?
Yeah.
The ones that really speak to the human condition. And Wallace's story, it's about courage, it's about sacrifice, and that fight for freedom. Those are themes that they transcend time and place.
Yeah, for sure. And it's also a story about the power of myth making.
Mm.
I mean, even though we've kind of debunked some of those myths surrounding him,
Mm-hmm.
his image as this fearless warrior, the symbol of Scottish defiance, it still continues to inspire people.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about it. Despite Edward the First's, best efforts to erase his legacy,
Yeah.
to turn him into this traitor in the eyes of the English crown,
Mm.
Wallace, he became a martyr
Yeah.
for the Scottish cause.
His brutal execution, I mean, it didn't quell the rebellion at all.
No.
It kind of just fueled the flames of Scottish nationalism.
It's a reminder that sometimes these attempts to silence dissent, they can have the opposite effect.
Right.
They can end up strengthening the very ideas they're trying to suppress.
And that brings us back to that national tale that Graham Morton was talking about.
Yeah.
Right. But I mean, Wallace's story, it was woven into the very fabric of Scottish identity. It became
Mhm.
this symbol of their, enduring struggle for independence.
And it makes you wonder, right? Like, what stories from our own time will be passed down? Which figures will become those symbols
Right.
of our struggles and triumphs?
Yeah. It's a really interesting question to think about. So as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of William Wallace, I don't know, I'm kind of left with this sense of awe. like the power of his story to just transcend the boundaries of time and geography.
Yeah. And I'm struck by the fact that even though we've explored, all these historical complexities, peeled back some of the myths, he still remains this enigmatic figure.
Right. There's still so much that we don't know, so
Yeah.
much that's left open to interpretation.
And that's, I think, what makes history so fascinating. It's not just this collection of facts and dates. It's this ongoing conversation, this constant process of discovery and reinterpretation.
Right. And we've tried to, I think, present this balanced view of Wallace, acknowledging his military genius, his political savvy, and his flaws.
Yeah, we've seen how he was both a product of his time, but also a figure who kind of transcended it.
And we've explored how his story continues to resonate with people today.
Mm.
It inspires us to think about our own values, our own struggles, and our own place in the world.
Yeah. So as you go about your day, I want you to consider this. What is it about Wallace's story that speaks to you, personally? What aspects of his character, his choices, his legacy do you find the most compelling?
And how can we apply those lessons that we've learned
Yeah.
from his life to the challenges that we face in our own time?
They're good questions,
Yeah.
really worth reflecting on. Because ultimately, the power of history lies in its ability to illuminate the present and maybe even guide us
Right.
toward a better future.
Well, that wraps up our deep dive into the life and legacy of William Wallace.
It does.
I hope you've enjoyed the journey.
I hope so too. We encourage you to keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep into this fascinating world of history.